Welcome to Lessons in Lockdown with Open Doors. I'm Emma Worrall, and with me is Eddie Lyle. Over the past weeks of lockdown, we've had some moments to really reflect, moments to remember, significant times, I think. And in today's Lessons in Lockdown, we're going to just do that. We're going to have an act of remembrance. Eddie.
Well, Emma, there's a whole industry around remembering. Once upon a time, it was a things to do list like this that I would populate. Now every day I get my phone ringing, my computer ringing, I get texts, I get telephone messages. Remembering is a really essential ingredient in contemporary life. The other evening I found myself pulling out a lot of our old photograph albums and going back across the years to remember significant moments in my family's life, and it was very heartwarming. Now we do it digitally. But thinking about remembering in the scriptures is something that's really quite important as well. There is a gold thread through the entirety of the scriptures from Genesis through to Revelation about a God who remembers, a God who never forgets. I was just reading in the book of James that it's really important that we are not only hearers of the word, but doers of the word. I'm reminded, along with the psalmist, that the Lord sees the sufferings of his people. He never forgets them. And then, of course, there is the marvelous verse in the book of Hebrews chapter 13. Remember those that are in prison as if you were in prison with them, and those who suffer as if you suffer. In the Old Testament, we see examples where people built an altar in order to remember seminal moments when God intersected with their life. I think remembering is such an important principle. We must never forget the truths. We must hide the truths in our heart. Emma, when we were planning for today's session, I remember asking you a rather facetious question. I think we should put it that way. Tell me, Emma, what are the 5 most transforming sermons that you've ever listened to in your entire life? And I saw the shock on your face, and then I gave you the get out of jail card by saying, tell me, who are the 5 most significant people that you've met that have caused you to think more about getting closer to Jesus? Because people are really important. Remembering these encounters are really important. We mustn't forget these seminal moments. They're precious to us as we carry them forward in our lives.
Yeah, Eddie, I think you're right. I think I can definitely remember people that have transformed my life, probably a little bit more than those sermons, although very good sermons, I'm sure they were as well. Yeah, I think like what you're saying, you know, there are seasons, moments in your life, or people that you meet whose story profoundly shapes you, leaves a deep mark on you, doesn't it? And for sure, I've met people like that, and I think it's the power of the story, isn't it? The powerful story of the individual person, what they might stand for, what they might believe in. And I think for me too, I think it's not enough just to be impressed or be moved by a story, but actually, does it actually change my behavior, my heart posture? Am I actually, what you just said really, am I actually living it out? Am I responding? Am I actually practicing what I'm hearing or what I'm experiencing? And I think too, what you're saying, those moments become anchor points. They become reference points, if you like, don't they, for future experiences and moments just to really hang things on, I think. And in fact, it's exactly a year ago this week that I and 3 other women from the United Kingdom were in Nigeria, and I have to say I spent a week with some incredibly inspirational, courageous women, and for sure some of them would feature, I think, in my top 5 list of people whose stories have profoundly shaped me. And I think this week I've been doing a lot of remembering, a lot of reflecting on that time in Nigeria. And I have to say, looking back on my 2019, that week for me was a bit like a spiritual detox. You know, I left my family for a week, which obviously was tough on one hand, but in lots of ways, it got rid of a lot of distraction. My life became simpler on one level. But I think what was really special was almost like that closeness, the proximity I felt felt with Jesus. And I think it was because of the time that I spent with 12 incredible women whose story of injustice and suffering indelibly left a mark on me, I think. And just a really powerful time. And I think for me, I look back on that week and I came back feeling a bit cleaner, a bit simpler, as I said, but yet really just defined, I think, quite deeply by those stories that I'd encountered.
Yeah, one of the privileges of my job over the last several years has been working alongside the Black Church here in the United Kingdom. And a bit like you, I took 4 leaders from a broad cross-section of the Black Church in London with me to Nigeria a couple of years ago. Some of them were Nigerian by birth, some of them by descent. And I met one woman that I will never forget. Her name was Angela. That day we'd been distributing food and books and libraries and hymnals, and I'd prayed for scores of leaders. There was a moment when I was invited to commission and send 100 Black church leaders back to the north, where they'd literally stepped out of killing fields. It was such a time of great emotion, seeing these dear brothers going back to very uncertain futures. But I was standing outside in the courtyard, and a lady walked by. I greeted her. She curtsied. I bowed. I said, "Do you have a minute?" And she said yes. And I said, "I'd love you to tell me your story." It was like a Holy Spirit thing. It wasn't pre-organized in any way, but I just said, "Tell me your story." And her name was Angela, and she told me that just a few weeks ago she'd had to flee the northern provinces. I should say that this story is particularly raw today because there's a press release that's just come out that has said over the last months over 6,000 Christians have been martyred for their faith, over 300,000 people displaced. I think that's why the story has come back to me in this interview today, because those days I heard stories that are just so horrendous that innocent people should have to endure this level of violence. But Angela told me that she'd just arrived in this city, which needs to remain anonymous for obvious reasons, but she fled with her 3 children in a bus. She'd been on a bus for 3 weeks to get to this place of safety. And she told me that all that she can remember was hugging her husband and her son and saying goodbye. And all that she has to remember them by are 3 missed phone calls on her mobile, because just the day before she'd received a phone call to say that both of their bodies had been found, and that they had been mercilessly murdered by Boko Haram extremists. And I said, "Angela, I don't know how to pray for you today. I believe that God brought us together. Can you tell me how I can pray?" And she said this simple phrase to me. She said, "I know that God sees me, Pastor Eddie. I know that God sees me and that he hasn't forgotten me." And then I said, can I pray for you?" And she knelt down at my feet. Why she would kneel in front of me, I don't know. But I immediately took off my hat and I knelt beside her in the dirt. And as I did, I prayed that God would give me words of comfort and help, and I believe that he did. But I also remember those scriptures where Jesus is recognized as not having equality with God to be grasped, but he took upon himself a servant, and he came down and he got down literally in the dirt with us to empathize with our pain and our suffering. He remembers our pain and our struggle and our humanity, and he sits now right beside Jesus, interceding for Angela and for her boys and for her uncertain future. He intercedes for those precious souls the families of those that have been mercilessly murdered at this stage. Coming back again to those verses in Hebrews, remember those who are in prison as if we were in prison, those who suffer. No matter what color of people's skins, whatever ethnicity they come from, whatever tribe that they come from, we are all equal in the eyes of God, our Creator. We're all made in His image. And when one part of the body hurts, we all hurt. We need that sensitivity. And so remembering is important, not remembering statistics, but this is family business. Those who are in prison today in Iran, we need to remember them. We need to know their stories. The people that you met in Nigeria, the people that I met, I will never forget them. Remembering is so important. We mustn't grow weary, and we mustn't just only hear their stories. We must be moved to compassionate action as well.
Yeah, I think it's really powerful, that whole reminder of how God sees. And I think for me, looking back and meeting 12 women who had all been widowed, raped, kidnapped at the hands of Boko Haram and Fulani herdsmen, that they came to the Open Doors Run Trauma Centre carrying a story of grief and that burden of injustice. And obviously that is still a part of their story, deeply shaped them. But over the course of 5 days, it was just so precious to see Jesus at work. And they left sort of with dignity and hope and a renewed sense of identity of whose they were in God's sight. And that was also now part of their story. And I think too, that whole idea of being listened to, remembering, is so important. And I've seen that, I think, and you have too, Eddie, I'm sure, in the kind of trauma care work that Open Doors is doing. Because I think a big part for those women in their journey of sort of recovery, if you like, or rebuilding their lives, and realizing that there is so much potential in them, that they don't have to be defined by their grief and their suffering, but they have so much to still give back to their communities, and can be leaders in their communities and leaders in their families. But I think part of that journey for them, or the start of that journey to recovery, was being listened to, remembering what had happened to them, almost having that story and that experience validated. And I think for me, a sort of very sort of a raw, emotional, but a powerful moment of connection for the women at the trauma centre was when the team did a session or a drama, if you like, on listening. And very simply, one part of the drama was someone not listening at all well, distractive, not at all present with the person that they were talking to. The second part of the drama was someone fully present, empathetic, fully focused. And it was such a game changer for the women. I think they all began to cry. And later we asked one of them, Naomi, why that session on listening had been so powerful. And she said, because nobody listens to us. Nobody remembers what's happened, our story of pain and injustice. And so for Naomi's case, for over 2.5 years, she hadn't talked to anyone about her husband being murdered by Boko Haram. Not even within her church community. Such was the shame, the stigma, the silence that was perpetuated. And yet at that moment, they realized that their story could be heard, that they could be remembered, that that they were known, they were seen. Just absolutely powerful moment. And I think that's really stuck with me, how important it is that we listen, that we remember, that we profoundly are shaped by those moments and experiences.
And every story is precious, and God never forgets, and He certainly never forgets His promises. He's a promise keeper. So today, don't feel that you're not listened to. Don't feel that you're not loved. Know that you're loved with a love that is inextinguishable, because that's the God that we serve.
Amen. Let's just maybe end with Hebrews 13:3 again, which says, remember those in prison and those mistreated as if you were there. Thank you for joining us today. It's been great to share a little bit with you on this theme of remembrance. See you again soon.
Goodbye.